Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. We are excited to present Code of Conduct Restorative Practices During Online Learning. With you, Dacia Campbell, Assistant Superintendent for Accountability, Elementary Schools, Jody LG, Senior Director of Succeed Boston at the Counseling and Intervention Center, Llewellyn Murray, Succeed Boston NIJ Restorative Justice Grant Manager, and myself, Flavia Santos, Assistant Director of Succeed Boston at the Counseling Intervention Center. Here we have our agenda for today. Our goals today are to address the problem of practice, what is restorative justice, how do restorative practices in the code align with the problem of practice, the strategic vision, and the Office of Achievement Gap? Why restorative justice? The code of conduct. How to perform, if necessary, emergency removal, and how to do the due process. You're going to be able to see how to seek operational leader support, as well as Succeed Boston supports online learning and hybrid models. We are also going to cover remote learning expectations for students and support services for staff. We're going to show you how to perform disciplinary and non-disciplinary processes during online learning. And since this is a recording session or recorded session, we would like to ask you that you fill out our survey at the end of the presentation and let us know any questions that you may have that were not answered during the presentation, as well as any feedback that can help us improve our material and the information that we are sharing today. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoy.
Our overarching objectives for returning Boston Strong professional learning are: number one, incorporate students' cultural knowledge and affirm students' racial and cultural identities. Number two, establish educator care in cultural responsive learning environment. Number three, promote open communication between families and the district in developing partnership with parents and caregivers and valuing funds of knowledge. Number four, discover students' strengths and observing students' potential for learning. Number five, where relevant, capitalizing on opportunities for students' input and dialogue. And number six, incorporate issues important to students and their families. Our objectives for this training are to support students in their thinking about the alignment of the code to BPS's strategic vision, our commitments and our mission, support you to use the code of conduct to promote positive relationships amongst school staff, students, and parents, increase your understanding of restorative practices with a focus on restorative discipline to address incidents of more serious harm, and also to learn more about Succeed Boston and the Counseling Intervention Center's remote and hybrid education, interventions, and support for our students.
Great. Thanks to everyone for joining us today. I want to take a minute for us to think about this quote and to ground us. Out beyond ideas of right, doing and wrongdoing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. Just take a minute, close your eyes, and breathe. We want to recognize that these are stressful and anxiety-provoking times, not only for students, but for all of you and us as well. It's particularly important that we take a collective deep breath to center and ground ourselves. The work we will be doing this year requires us to be patient, kind, and recognize the impact of this pandemic, the political and social unrest, and the reckoning with systemic racism. We as adults need to practice the very skills we expect from students, getting to know them and listening to who they are and what they bring to the table. Addressing the problem of practice. Our problem of practice is very clearly stated. BPS does not consistently provide authentic learning opportunities for students who are most marginalized to develop into self-determined, independent learners able to pursue their aspirations. Our failures, and those are our collective failures, lead to disengaged students and significant achievement gaps. The work that we'll be talking about today is in alignment with addressing the problem of practice. It's also in alignment with the strategic plan goal 1, which is to eliminate opportunities and achievement gaps. We want to provide equitable and excellent student outcomes so that BPS graduates will be ready for success in college, career, and life. Priority 1.7, which will be specifically discussed today, is to eliminate disproportionality in the implementation of the Code of Conduct by ensuring welcoming and affirming classrooms while applying restorative practices. Restorative justice supports all students celebrating varied stories and experiences. It sets expectations to provide and respect all student voices, building communities where students feel welcomed and included. Working collaboratively in a multidisciplinary team ensures that we promote sections 3 and 4 of the Boston Public Schools Code of Conduct. You'll hear much more about that. And those sections highlight prevention, intervention, and promotion. Through restorative practices, that work will keep students in the classroom, not being punished or excluded, furthering an achievement gap. When we talk about addressing the problem of practice, we're looking at the superintendent's strategic plan. We're pulling together the essentials for instructional equity, and we are also addressing the goals set forth by the Office of the Achievement Gap. Those goals specifically are eliminating opportunity and achievement gaps, holistic, culturally affirming approach to school and teacher quality, dismantling structural barriers and providing greater access to opportunities, and looking at students, families, and communities as authentic partners. In aligning what has always been good about the code with the Office of the Achievement Gap, the essentials for instructional equity, the strategic plan, and the problem of practice will help us learn more about and from students, build relationships by giving voice to students, leading to authentic engagement. Doing this kind of work with and in front of our students can be daunting and will take self-reflection of our own behavior and biases. But how can we ask students to do that work with the growth mindset or use empathy and get along with peers if we don't authentically do it ourselves? Think about it. How do you feel? And how would you react when your voice isn't or wasn't heard, or you feel disrespected and invisible?
So now we're going to talk a little bit about restorative justice and utilizing restorative practices in an online setting to implement the code. But before I do that, I do want to present you all with a scenario. Maybe you are watching this with your team or you're watching it at home yourself. So I just want to present the scenario. This is a common scenario that maybe you've already had to deal with. So a student disrupts a Zoom class. They start making inappropriate comments in the chat and then out loud, having unmuted their mic. So I would encourage you to think about how our quote unquote traditional discipline systems would address this. And when I say traditional discipline, I mean not just in person or online, but I also am referring to our overwhelmingly punitive or retributive system of discipline as opposed to our restorative systems. And then I would encourage you to think about how we could address this restoratively. So I'll give you a second to think about that, and then I'll offer you some preventative practices before we start discussing RJ. So assuming that you've discussed this with your teams or thought about it yourself, some preventative practices that you could use to resolve this situation would be affective or I statements, or a restorative conversation where you ask the restorative questions to process or reflect on the incident, community building circles with the whole class to build relationships and establish values and expectations for your virtual space, problem-solving circles to reaffirm those values, or for general class discussion about creating safe online communities. So what is restorative justice? So restorative justice focuses on the development and the reparation of relationships, especially after when incidents of harm have been done. So this is a way of being and a philosophy that is indigenous in its origins. And as a result, one of the major tenets and core values of restorative justice is that harm affects everyone. So where our traditional, and again, I refer to that with quotes, where our traditional system of discipline asks what rule was broken and who did it and how we can punish them, restorative justice instead says that harm affects everyone, not just the person who caused harm and the person who was harmed, but the larger community as well. So as a result, decisions about how to repair that harm have to be determined by the people most affected, because they are the only people who truly know how to make things right. So restorative justice practices aim to move us in the direction of our best selves, and to explore how wrongdoing has impacted everybody involved, and to develop agreements that move us forward, and to grow and learn from situations of harm, to increase our trust and safety and the understanding with one another that things are better in the future. And restorative justice is not limited to just an in-person space. Since the school closure, although it's certainly not a substitute for in-person connection, we have transferred to online, and there are a lot of trainings available that can be accessed through TeachPoint, and we'll discuss at the end of this presentation as well. And because RJ is all about relationships, it will be much harder, especially now, to engage students or even other adults and then repair any harm if there was no relationship to begin with. As we all know, building trust takes time and work. But now is also the time to get creative and to work with constraints like technology rather than see them as barriers to connecting with one another, even if it's not ideal. So why do we use restorative justice? So restorative justice aligns with the superintendent's strategic plan, and the district's goal is to promote safe and welcoming schools and learning environments, create sustainable discipline strategies, keep our most marginalized students, especially in school, particularly now after the closure. It provides students with more opportunities to develop into those self-determined learners. It increases parent and guardian participation, and it aligns with sections 3 and 4 of the Code of Conduct and provides a through line for this Code of Conduct in the strategic plan to further develop our students and our own social emotional well-being. So restorative justice is broken down into 3 tiers. At tier 1, these are practices that affect everyone, and these are practices that universally a school community can implement right from the get-go. And this is your preventative foundation. And then moving up this pyramid graphic that you see here on the bottom, tier 2, you should have fewer interventions, but this is used to address everyday behavioral incidents or sort of problem solving and reestablishing school community and class community values when things have gone wrong. And then tier 3 is the most intensive and most responsive section of restorative practices, where after serious incidents of harm, students have to be re-welcomed and reintegrated into the school community. So if you see this graphic at the top, I like to show this graphic, this continuum of restorative practices, to emphasize really that the 3 tiers of restorative practices align with MTSS and our code levels of promotion, prevention, and intervention. So this is work that we've all been doing across the district for years and is a best practice for student engagement. And we want to be focused on prevention, but be prepared for intervention. So this continuum is a good visual to see just how many options that you have at your disposal that aren't necessarily circle, which is most associated with restorative justice practices, and also don't necessarily require reinventing the wheel from how we normally interact as educators. All of this, all of these practices go back to those core beliefs that I mentioned in the previous slide, that, all humans would like to be in good connection with one another, and we need to bring each other closer after harm has done, not push each other further away, and that we already have everything we need to make a positive change with us. So when we are looking at tier 1 preventative practices, we are thinking especially about circle. This is the practice that is most associated with RJ. So circle has many benefits, and you can use circles for community building and pedagogy. So you can use it to actually teach a lesson in your classroom. Circles build relationships. They foster equity, unity, and autonomy. These help to create values-based caring classrooms, which promote collaboration and shared commitment to a group. They provide a safe, structured space for learning. Learning is risky, and we need to be able to create class and school environments that allow students to engage in this risk safely and without fear of judgment. And we can model this specifically through Circle. Circle also honors and centers student voice for all styles of learning. Through the authentic opportunity to pass during rounds, students actually are encouraged to participate because they know they have the chance to instead opt out if they need to and disengage for a moment before rejoining the community. And Circle allows students to practice and apply their skills and demonstrate their understanding if you're using it in the context of teaching a lesson. And ultimately, it promotes reflection on successes and the challenges of learning in whatever shape or form that is taking place in your classroom. So these are the circle elements. These are the things that make up a circle. And really the main takeaway from this slide and the main takeaway from the purpose of the circle elements is that Circle is meant to be distinguished as a special space that is different from ordinary meetings or any other sort of part of the day that you may have. Circle gives us permission to share and listen deeply and to come together and collaborate to problem solve or just connect with one another on a fundamental level as human beings and just be together and share in the same space. So these elements of Circle honor this by creating a ritual and a routine to mark this special space, as well as honoring restorative justice's indigenous roots. So the dynamic of Circle is actually going to be influenced by participants. The way Circle is formatted, participants sitting in a circle will actually influence the way the circle ends up being. So as a facilitator, if we are keeping Circle, we are not here to determine the issues or the outcome. Instead, we are all just sharing in the same collective space where our own thoughts and feelings will drive how the circle will be, and we will end up sharing as much or as little as we need. So this is an example of some virtual circle agreements. So when you're doing your circles, this is maybe a template that you might use in adapting it for a virtual space. So the agreements at the top, these are agreements that we use at Succeed Boston. And one thing to keep in mind is that when you come up with your circle agreements, even if they're pre-decided like these are, you always want to ask the group for additional input, and you may need to suspend the talking piece in order to have open discussion if people need to change or add any values. In terms of adapting it for a virtual space, we ask that participants, if possible, keep their camera on, but their mic muted. In cases where this isn't possible, especially if you're dealing with some students who, for whatever reason, choose not to have their camera on, I know it's a little easier to have that happen with adults. But if you have students who choose not to have their camera on, that's why you ask them to show nonverbal feedback. So nonverbal feedback can look like utilizing emoji reactions or typing in the chat if they want to share a thought or you know, agree with something or show some sort of solidarity and connection with the other participants in the circle. And then the orders of the speakers will be posted. So in a physical circle, you know, the order is determined by passing the talking piece around and the participants sitting in the circle. In a virtual setting, we have also adapted this where we actually, you know, we have a visual that we post on the screen with participants' names, and we have a visual centerpiece. And in the next slide, we can see what that looks like. So in this slide, we can see how we've adapted the talking order for a virtual space. So as I mentioned before, in person, when you're sitting in circle, you have your participants sitting in the physical circle. There will be a centerpiece in the center. Usually this is going to be something that is meaningful to the facilitator or the participants, but it doesn't have to be, as long as it sort of pulls focus to the center of the room and sets a nice tone for the space. So in this slide, in our virtual space, we have our virtual centerpiece incorporating the 4 elements of nature here. And we've arranged participants in a quote unquote virtual circle where we'll, you know, if you're holding circle, you can type your participant's name in the little circles there. And then the order, the talking order is determined that way. So for example, if Jody, Flavia, Daisy, and I were all sitting in the circle, Jody's name might be at the top, so she might start the round, and then she can choose who she passes the quote unquote virtual talking piece to next. So when she's done sharing, she would then say, I'll pass it to Dacia, or if she wanted to go the other way, she could say, I'll pass it to Lou. And that's really how the rounds are conducted instead. So another way to implement the talking order in a virtual space is just simply to type your participant's name in the chat or somewhere on the screen. If you have a slide, they don't have to be alphabetized or anything. You can just go across your screen as people appear, and you can use this as your talking order. So, you know, if you sat in circle in person, it's a very similar way of operating online, where if somebody passes, or if for some reason you have to skip over somebody, let's say somebody has to leave the meeting for a moment, or, you know, they just are having issues and they're not present at that second, you just skip over them and you continue down the talking order or through the talking order. And you always want to make sure that you're coming back to the person that wasn't able to share first, and giving them that opportunity to share if they passed or if they weren't there at the time. And keep in mind, remember that we said that students need that authentic and adults need that authentic opportunity to pass. So as part of one of our circle agreements, we always say that participants can always pass. You know, just being mindful that passing is not necessarily a lack of engagement or a sign that somebody's not listening or not in it. You know, all of us benefit from having that authentic opportunity to say no, and to share when instead we feel ready, and to keep in mind that listening is also a form of participation. So at the end of this presentation, you will see in more detail some of the resources and the supports that we're offering in relation to this PD. But one of the supports that I've been offering since school closure is that I have developed a PD series called Remote Connections, Restorative Justice Practices During Online Learning. And this is a series of standalone PDs that help staff increase their understanding of restorative justice practices and implementing them in a virtual space since the school closure, that is consistently ongoing. I've developed a curriculum for this as well. So all of those PDs can be accessed through TeachPoint if you would like to attend, because there's plenty more information that I could go more in depth into about specifically utilizing restorative justice practices. And we will also be in the future leading full circle trainings, so tier 1, 2, and 3, as another opportunity to learn more about restorative justice practices in online settings.
Zoom. Code of conduct. we've talked about restorative practices as one of the alternatives to discipline that you can find in sections 3 and 4 of the Code of Conduct. But let's talk a little bit more about the Code of Conduct and what it is. The Code of Conduct is comprised of federal and state laws, and it details Boston Public Schools policies about appropriate student behavior, as well as procedures for disciplinary action. But overall, the code is really about creating safe and welcoming school environments to support student learning. Yeah, that's the correct slide. The Code of Conduct is usually thought of as a punitive tool, but the code is really about promotion, prevention, and intervention. Promotion is about fostering emotional well-being of all students through school-wide approaches to support positive behavioral health. Prevention is to intervene early to minimize escalations of identified behavioral symptoms through targeted collaborative supports. And interventions, which provide and participate in coordinated care for the small number of students demonstrating considerable need. We've talked a little bit about sections 3 and 4, safe and welcoming whole school environments and other student-centered interventions and approaches. But we're going to also talk a little bit more about section 7 and section 9. So again, sections 3 and 4 support you with providing behavioral intervention tools to help students promote or help you to limit exclusionary practices. Further, sections 3 and 4 align with 1.7 of our priority 1.7 of our strategic plan of eliminating disproportionality in the implementation of the Code of Conduct and ensuring welcoming and affirming school classrooms by applying restorative practices. These two areas of the code really do provide tools that you can put into your toolbox to support you building alternatives to discipline, and it really will help you so that you do not have to gravitate towards section 7 of the code. Section 7 of the code is where you're going to find more of your violations that will lead to exclusion of students. You really should be using section 7 when you have exhausted all alternatives to discipline, because discipline should be seen as a last resort. It also, section 7, you should gravitate towards section 7 when things are more egregious in the classroom or online. And due process, I'll review in a little bit more in detail, really talks about the rights of students and families to be heard. Due process really is about notification to families about hearing procedures. Specifically, due process rights will be notifications that must be in the student's home language. It needs to be timely. On that notification, you need to have a date and time of the hearing. Also, parents need to know that, that they have the right to be heard, that they are entitled to interpretive services. Interpretive services also need to be provided by the school. Can you go to slide 21? Sure. So just to give you a visual, here is kind of an overview of section 9 due process and steps that you need to take in order to hold a hearing. And please remember that, students and families have an opportunity to hear evidence, to be heard, and also to question witnesses. Next slide. Again, discipline should always be used as a last resort. If you're going to take away anything from this section or even the entire presentation, this is really what I want you to walk away with. The Code of Conduct is not all about how to discipline students. I think that's a major misconception when people think about the Code of Conduct, that they gravitate towards section 7 and those violations. But I really want school-based teams to review sections 3 and 4 of the code that focuses on alternatives to discipline. And previously you've heard about RJ, restorative practices, and that is one of the alternatives to discipline. There are more, but today we're highlighting our restorative practices. And again, to tie it all together, the code of conduct is aligned with the district's strategic vision, specifically priority 1.7, which guides our work to ensure that discipline, specifically out of school suspension, is a last resort. And we're taking that very seriously in terms of giving you strategies to ensure that is the case whenever possible. I must also now mention to you that a few years ago, I believe 2017, the district was at a risk of being sued, and we entered into an agreement with Greater Boston Legal Services. And I'm going to highlight 4 major changes that we've changed within our code that are in line with this agreement. I must also say that the current code does not have these agreements built into it. There was a revision that has been done, and that the new code will be available later of the school year. So this agreement does not live within the code of conduct, and that is why I need to highlight it. One of them is to our emergency removal protocol, stating that that school leaders may remove students from school temporarily before providing the necessary written notice. And what this really means is this is the only time where a school can suspend, quote, a student without a hearing. And if you go through this presentation, you'll find the steps and the requirements for this process. Additionally, that typically before you could suspend from K to 12, this agreement states that from K0 to 2nd grade, you cannot suspend students. In alignment with that, there's also been a limitation on suspensions in grades 3 to 5. And the limitations are listed here to these 5 different offenses. These offenses also align with section 7. So to flesh that out a little bit more is, if you're going to suspend a student, you can't just suspend them for sexual misconduct. You actually need to go to section 7 and find the correct violation and make sure that you're using the section 7 violation. But again, I want you to walk away with, you can only, if you do have to suspend a student, you can only suspend them for these things. Additionally, the agreement that we entered into stated that we would be documenting all exclusions, all alternatives, all exclusionaries within our Aspen SIS systems. Furthermore, documentation should always be put into Aspen, into the conduct module. If you need further assistance in terms of how to use Aspen or any questions where things should go, you can always email the Aspen team at aspen@bostonpublicschools.org for support. Here's just some additional information on emergency removal. This is really one of the main things in that Greater Boston Legal Services Agreement that you need to pay attention to. And just to reiterate, and to make mention that there is an emergency removal process, a universal sign out that you need to complete prior to any emergency removals that need to be logged into Aspen. Next slide. So I went over a little bit of the code, just sections 3 and 4, 7 and 9, and I really didn't even go deeply into it. If you need further support on the code, the operational leaders in your areas, and you can see they're listed by regions, are all trained deeply into the code and know it very well. Most of them have rewritten the code, and are experts. And so they can always be a resource to schools, to school leaders on all things code of conduct.
Now we want to talk about remote learning expectations for students and Succeed Boston supports. During the closure in the spring, sorry about that. During the closure in the spring, we found that students, families, and staff needed more guidance about expectations during online learning. There are some guidelines on this slide, which I'll do a quick, I'll go through quickly so that you can see. There are 2 videos. There are some guidelines that were put together by the Office of Instructional Technology and the Office of Equity, as well as Operations. And we will just talk very quickly about them. So essentially, we want to make sure that students understand that they need to be present in the remote learning expectation.
Zoom.
Coming back, I want to share with you some support services that we've put together for students and for staff. We heard what you were saying, and we're really excited to share these resources. It was a collaborative effort with OIIT, the Office of Equity, as well as Operations. And these are some of the tips. So we have Google Meeting safety tips for hosts and participants. We also have them right now translated in Spanish, and we're in the process of having them translated into other languages. I think that you'll find these resources to be really helpful. Students and families, not only school staff, have asked for them because they want to support their students in doing the right thing while online. We've also put together a couple of videos, which I believe are just amazing, to help students understand in another way, to understand what our expectations are while they are learning remotely. So the first one is a K-5 video.
Hi everyone, my name is Ms. Oliveira. It's good to see you today. How are you feeling about learning from home? Today, I want to talk to you about your online classes and how to be respectful of your classmates and teachers while you're learning from home. At the Boston Public Schools, we value diversity and we respect everyone in our schools. We get along with children and adults who come from many different countries and have many different cultural backgrounds. We make friends with children who may look different than ourselves, and we are proud of who we are.
It's important never to say or post mean things about your classmates or other young people online, and never to make fun of someone for who they are. Don't send or post mean images or photos. The same rules apply whether we are learning in school or at home.
Let's make sure that we are kind to one another online. That will help us feel safe and able to learn. If you have any questions about these rules or whether something that happened was okay, please ask your teacher or any adult who works at your school. Have a great day.
We ask that you share that video as well as the next one that you will see with your students in the appropriate grade level. We're going to share the 6 through 12 now.
The Boston Public Schools is dedicated to ensuring every student is safe and respected, whether students are online or in person. As students, it's our responsibility to take steps to keep our information safe and secure. Stay safe online by setting your passwords and keeping your personal information private. It is also important to be honest with your identity online. We also have to make sure we use appropriate language and treat others with respect. This includes not engaging in insults, slurs, stereotypes, or sexual comments or images, or other bias-based behavior. Bias-based behavior is when someone treats a student differently or makes an offensive comment because of their race, ethnicity, gender, religion, disability, sexual orientation, or other identity. Sending unwanted sexual messages, photos, or videos violates a person's right to consent and may make them feel unsafe or threatened. If you witness or experience bias-based behavior or sexual misconduct, you can send a screenshot to a school administrator, even if it happens outside of school. Together, we can create an online learning environment that is safe, supportive, and allows for all of us to bring our full, authentic selves each and every day.
So those are some of the resources that we put together. Thank you. Can we go back again, please? Thank you. We want you to use those videos, as I said, for your appropriate grade level that you're teaching, but we also want you to use them as a starting off point for talking about expectations and supports for students while online. So these are some of the expectations that we have developed, but I'm sure, like with classroom rules and school rules, they need to include student voice. And I would urge you to have students participate in what is acceptable online behavior. So when students are disrupting during the remote learning process, we always want to think about exclusion as the last resort. So we've put together some ways that you may want to deal with a student who is exhibiting behavior that is disruptive to the learning process. Our emphasis really is trying to understand where the student is, what's going on in their life, and what they may need to be supported. So one thing that you could do is give the student a warning in the private chat. And if the student doesn't see the message, ask the student to check his or her chat. Just say, there's a message for you in the chat, Ms. Santos. If the disrupting behavior continues, mute the student temporarily or for the duration of the class. And after the student returns to the class online, if the behavior continues, put the student in the call waiting room for up to 5 minutes. We want to make it really clear, though, that after each of these steps is taken, we want to have a conversation with a student at the end of the class to find out what's going on and what we can do to support them to be more successful in the remote learning opportunity. If the behavior continues again, so first a warning, then you're putting it in the chat, then you're blocking them or muting them for the duration of the class, and you may have to put them in the waiting room for a while. You want to pull in the parents, guardians, and talk with them. Pull in the student's parent or guardian to discuss the incident and see if perhaps they can come up with a solution collaboratively with you to make it a better learning environment for their student. If the disruptive behavior continues in future classes, you want to arrange a meeting. So once again, we're using progressive measures from the least restrictive to the most restrictive. And finally, if the behavior escalates to a point that it is actually a code of conduct violation, and we'll speak specifically about that in the next coming slides, then you can actually have a hearing and apply discipline should that be necessary. So we have two different ways that Succeed Boston will continue to support students during online learning. In the spring and throughout the summer, actually, we had voluntary workshops for students who needed just a little bit of education and support so that they could learn about whatever sort of problem they were having online that led to a disruption in the learning process. So some of that may have been bias-based speech, some of them that may have been bullying, some of them may have been inappropriate conversations about substance use or abuse, and some of that had to do with sexual misconduct. Those are all topics that we covered. There's a very specific process outlined here, and you can click on the links and get more information. Essentially, what we want to make sure that you know is that Succeed Boston is still here to support students, whether it's online or in person. And we actually found it to be a very successful way to talk with students. We were surprised because there was no in-person way to engage, but surprisingly to us, the intimate relationship of a one-on-one with someone and talking about their behavior really resulted in positive outcomes with positive feedback from school leaders, from school staff, from students themselves, and also for parents. The other way that we will continue to support students is, once again, as Dacia Campbell said, using the services at Succeed Boston as a disciplinary option, and that is as a last resort. So any student who violates the Code of Conduct, Section 7, and you can click on this link and find that, we will continue to serve those students. The procedures are here and you can link into them. But basically what we're saying is that if a student is referred to Succeed Boston for a suspension, we will support them in any way that we can. That means that we will provide them with individual counseling, social emotional learning, skill development, anger management, decision-making skills, bullying prevention and intervention, bias-based speech, healthy relationships, drug and alcohol awareness, and stress reduction, mindfulness, violence prevention, and intervention. And the way that we've done it in the spring was we saw students for a set number of hours every day and provided them with that direct online intervention that addressed the specifics of the reason that they were suspended. Please reach out to us if you have any questions at all. We're available, and we want to help you. Thanks.
Thanks, Jody. And again, as I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, here in yellow, you can find the link for the survey for this session. Please, if you can, take 1 to 5 minutes to complete the survey. Your feedback is very important to us, is welcomed. We want to know any questions that you have, questions that were not answered during this presentation, maybe new ideas for future presentations that we can create for you. during the online learning and hybrid models. And if you can, please let us know also in the survey, what's one thing that you learned in this session that you are eager to learn more about. This is very important to us to learn from you. Thank you so much. And as promised, here we have a slide with some resources, the code of conduct, links for the English and Spanish versions. We also have, we can ask for different language if you need. We have a link for the Boston, Greater Boston Legal Services Settlement Agreement, Superintendent Circulars, how to generate a conduct letter in Aspen, and much more information. And regarding Succeed Boston, all online services will be available for K-12 students. You can click at the link for more information regarding the services that we're going to provide this year. And the third bullet, we have a link for information regarding the voluntary workshops. If you have any questions, if you need some support, you can send us an email to referral.succeed@bostonpublicschools.org. Then we have some information about our bullying prevention and intervention plan. And also, please tell your families please feel free to always call our bullying prevention hotline at 617-592-2378 if you want to file a bullying complaint. And as Mr. Murray mentioned also earlier in this presentation, here are some restorative justice resources, BPS, Restorative Practices Professional Development, tiers 1, 2, and 3. We recommend the Little Book of Restorative Justice. Mr. Murray is going to be offering Remote Connections PD series through TeachPoint. I will be offering bullying prevention and intervention also through TeachPoint. We are offering one-stop stop, block, and talk with the DA's office regarding internet safety. We have some PDs about suicide prevention with the Samaritans, social media, and healthy relationships with One Love Foundation. You can find everything in TeachPoint. Also, we recommend for RJ Circle Forward. If you can participate on the NIJ Grant Circle trainings, if you are part of the grant. And the last one is the Little Book of Race and Restorative Justice, Black Lives Healing and U.S. Social Transformation. So these are some resources that we recommend for you. And lastly, here is your exit ticket. It's very important if you click on this link and fill out the exit ticket so you can get your PDP points for professional learning development hours for this session. So that's very important. Thank you. And here you can find our emails. If you have any questions, any suggestions, we would be happy to hear from you. And again, thank you so much for being with us today, and we hope to see you soon. Thank you so much and have a great day.